everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's review, we shall be taking a look at the Transformers Kingdom Leader Class Ultra Magnus, a figure which, when rumoured, many of you, myself included, were eagerly awaiting to see as to what Hasbro would come up with. Of course, then we've got the leaked images of Ultra Magnus in the packaging, and due to how the new Kingdom box art is designed, we only actually saw the top half, and I know, at least for me, I was really looking forward to seeing as to what the rest of the figure would look like. And then, of course, we got the official announcement, which basically just confirmed that the new Kingdom Ultra Magnus would essentially just be a makeover of the Siege version in order to try and create a little more of a G1 accurate representation. And whilst the new Kingdom version certainly is more G1 accurate, that's not to say that this is a great figure. In my opinion, there are some great, good, bad and very ugly points about this particular release. However, don't worry, we shall go into all of those points and more in this review. So without further ado, let's bring him in and take a closer look at the detail. Taking a closer look here at Kingdom Ultra Magnus, I would say that from the crutch plate upwards, Hasbro and Karatomi have done a really good job in replicating the character's appearance from the original 80s cartoon. It is merely when we begin to take a look here at the legs that some of my major critiques do lay, but nevertheless, starting off by focusing here on Ultra Magnus's head sculpt, this is indeed an entirely new sculpt when compared to the original Siege version. One of the more noticeable differences is that we now have the more iconic Ultra Magnus visor than as opposed to just the eyes that we got on the original release. The design of the helmet too is a lot more simplistic in order to match his original design, and I personally actually do prefer this. As we spin around here to the back of Ultra Magnus's head sculpt, you can see that they have indeed sculpted the back section as well as painted the ear sections, and light piping too has made a return, despite requiring quite a significant amount of light to actually shine through it before the eyes do illuminate. I have got to say that it is a sight to behold. As we take a look here towards Ultra Magnus's shoulders, you can see that as far as the sculpt work and design of these is concerned, they are a little smaller than compared to the Siege version, although the detail too, once again, is more accurate to how it appeared in the original show. They have also inverted the cast plastic as well as the paint ratio that we saw on the original Siege version, so whereas we had blue paint on the Siege, we now have cast blue plastic, and instead of having white plastic for these shoulder sections, we now have white paint. I personally do like how this looks, although you can see due to these sections being of a rather pointy nature, they are prone to paint chipping. We also do have new missile pods, and these are a little more sharper as far as the sculpt work is concerned, with the tips fully painted in a really nice looking red. As we take a look here towards the main torso section, once again this is an entirely new sculpt, and I really do love how this looks. Gone is the ghastly Siege battle damage, and we now have a much cleaner appearance from the character, something which many fans, myself included, were hoping for this particular release. You can see that as far as the sculpt work is concerned, this too looks really awesome, and much like the visor, we have got this very nice transparent blue plastic used here for the front chest. Taking a look here towards the top section, unfortunately this is just a direct carryover from what we saw on the Siege version, although you can truly appreciate how much sculpting and detailing has gone into this piece, and as it is something that we never really get a great look of in the 80s cartoon, I personally do not have much of an issue with this being reused. As we take a look here towards the forearms, unfortunately they still haven't managed to actually give us a white piece of plastic here for the elbow joint, which when you take into account all of the white plastic that this figure does have, it can stick out like a sore thumb in my opinion, and is something that I really wish they could have perfected for this particular release. The entire forearm armour is indeed a direct carryover from the Siege version, although much like the neck brace, it is nowhere near as noticeable as an area would be if they had reused the original head or if they had reused the original crutch plate. Talking of crutch plate, this too is completely resculpted, and you can see how we have got a super nice white paint application applied over the top, of course to pick out some of the sharper details of the sculpt. Spinning around here to the back of Ultra Magnus, unfortunately one of the ugly areas of this figure, and is something that is just a direct carryover from what we saw in the Siege version, is that the new Kingdom version does have a massive backpack as well as a massive butt pack. You can see that the lower half of the cab merely does just sit here on Ultra Magnus's butt, and I personally would have loved to have seen some new engineering incorporated into this figure to try and distribute some of this back kibble elsewhere. Taking a look here towards Ultra Magnus's legs, this is for sure where most of my complaints do unfortunately lay. This entire region here is just a direct carryover from what we saw in the original Siege release. The same can also be said here for the thighs as well as for the feet, and these sections here, from what I can tell, are the only new sculpted pieces. This entire region here at the back is just a direct carryover from the Siege version, and much like I mentioned in my thoughts and analysis video when this figure was first officially unveiled, I really wish that for this release they had decided to skip the entire white Optimus Prime motif, where you can actually armor that up in order to create Ultra Magnus. I personally would much rather just have the Ultra Magnus robot that transformed into the truck and trailer, and as this is now the third use of this engineering and of this mold, I personally do find this to be rather lazy on Hasbro's part. As this is supposed to represent his Earth mode, we do have newly sculpted wheels, which I have got to say look really awesome, and it is new additions like this which really make me wish we had gotten an entirely new sculpt here for this particular figure. Now, as far as articulation is concerned, we do get a ball joint here at the head, so this can look up and down, tilt side to side slightly, as well as look left to right. The arms can rotate the full 360. They can also hinge out to the sides. Rotation here at the bicep, as well as a 90-degree bend there at the elbow. We also do get full 360 here at the wrists. Due to the Earth mode changes, this back section does hang slightly lower than it did on the Siege release, which at first glance can hinder the waist rotation. However, if you just hinge this section up, it almost acts like a locking mechanism. You will indeed be able to utilize that waist joint, which can also rotate the full 360. We do get ratchets here at the legs, which can kick forwards that far, as well as back to that far. They can of course do the splits, although are not on ratchet joints. The hinge joints are very stiff on this figure, unlike my original Siege version, so he is able to hold a pose kicking out. We also do get the hinge joint here at the knee, which can bend roughly to 90. I would say that's more of an 85-degree of motion. And then finally, taking a look here at the feet, we do of course get the ankle rocker pivot. So as far as the articulation is concerned here for Kingdom Magnus, it is exactly the same as we got on the original Siege version. And going back to the sculpt and paintwork, as mentioned at the beginning of this segment, I really do love the entire upper torso, the head, the shoulders, and of course the chest unit. It's just when we do take into account how big and blocky these legs are that I begin to have an issue, and I would have loved to have seen a slightly longer design here for the leg and a little more of a streamlined design here for the lower section. Of course, Ultra Magnus was by no stretch of the imagination a very skinny and agile character. He did have some bulk, but it was not to this extent, and I really wish Hasbro and Takara Tomy would have completely re-engineered this entire lower section. Here for a War for Cybertron Trilogy Ultra Magnus size comparison, of course on the left we have the Siege version and on the right the new Kingdom version. And despite the critiques that I do have with the Kingdom version, given the option between the two, I will always of course go with the more G1 accurate looking representation, so I do actually prefer the newer version, although it is when you begin to take into account how much this figure does actually borrow from the original version that it does in my opinion begin to detract points from what could have been a great figure. Some of the inaccuracies of the Siege version were forgivable, as of course he was a Cybertronian representation of the character, whereas on the Kingdom version, as he's supposed to be more G1 accurate, I just am unable to forgive the very large and blocky legs. I do wish that they could have been slightly more refined as far as their design was concerned, and I really wish they could have done something with that back plate. Taking a look at the accessories, we of course do get the pair of missiles here for Ultra Magnus, which are indeed a completely different sculpt when compared to the version that we got here on the Siege release. We unfortunately do not get the two cannons that this original version did come with, although we do get the same blaster. So with the Siege version we did get this really awesome metallic silver blaster, and here with the new Kingdom version we get the exact same accessory, however this time done in a slightly more darker gunmetal colour. And I've got to say, I really do love the colour scheme that we do have on this weapon, although as this is a shiny pristine version of Ultra Magnus, I do believe that the metallic silver probably would work a little better with this version, and then the darker gunmetal with the actual Siege release. Here for an 86 Autobot movie size comparison, we have Kingdom Ultra Magnus compared to pretty much the main cast that we saw in the movie, with the exception of Springer, as unfortunately we haven't as of yet got an Earth mode representation of that character. And I actually really do love the scale between all of these, especially between of course Ultra Magnus and Grimlock. It's just that I cannot help but wonder how Ultra Magnus would have turned out if he was indeed a leader class for the 86 movie studio series line. Of course that line does appear to have a little bigger budget than compared to what we get with the War for Cybertron trilogy, as some of the figures do tend to get repainted in that line and of course heavily retooled. So I really wish that we could have gotten an entirely new sculpt here for this figure, but nonetheless, bringing Optimus Prime here into the equation, you can see that it is exactly the same as far as scale is concerned that we got with the original Siege release. Turning to transformation, as to be expected, it is exactly the same as what we got from the Siege version. So to begin with, you're going to want to turn your attention here to the back and just disengage these clips. We can take the shoulder pieces off and set these here off to the sides. You're then going to want to take this piece, disengage that here from this spine section, which will then allow you to bring this section forward and then disengage the main chest unit away from the white Optimus Prime chest. We can then take the Ultra Magnus forearms, hinge that down and pop that off. Of course, repeat the same process here on the opposite side. Come here to the legs and essentially just disengage those. Repeat the same process here for the opposite side. Take the crutch plate, pull it forward, rotate it around. We can then take these sections, disengage those, take the chest unit, pull that forward and push the head all the way out. Snap that into place, snap the shoulders into place, snap the crutch plate in. Just ensure that everything is tabbed in appropriately. We can then take this section here, and much like the Siege version, it is actually very difficult to hinge this entire region up to the point where I may actually decide to leave this here for this review, as honestly I do actually feel as if I am going to break this piece. Of course, we can take the hill spurs, flip those out, and here we have the White Optimus Prime, or the Armorless Ultra Magnus. Now, taking a look here at the White Optimus Prime, or the Armorless Ultra Magnus, you can see that I have brought in a piece of black card just so that we can see some of the sharper details here of the sculpt. Taking a closer look here at the head sculpt, this is once again another aspect of this figure, which is just a direct carryover from the original Siege version. We do have a nice light blue here applied to the mouth plate, as well as some red eyes. Autobot insignia. We of course have an entirely new remolded chest unit, of course to aid his Earth mode appearance, although I've got to say it does look a lot better when we of course have it in the truck configuration. The arms all appear to be the exact same as what we got from the Siege version. The crutch plate there, you can see, has got some nice blue paint apps, and the legs too are exactly the same. Spinning around here to the back, as mentioned, this section should sit here up at the top. I've only managed to do it once, and I thought I was nearly going to break the figure. I have no idea as to whether or not that is an isolated issue here on my copy, but for some reason it just does not want to budge, and honestly I do not want to break this figure. Bringing the original Siege version here in for a comparison, you can truly see the stark difference as far as the colour of white plastic that they have used. Here for the new Kingdom version, it is more of a pure white than as opposed to this almost sun damaged look that we got here for the Siege version. Once again, as far as a personal preference is concerned, I do much prefer the new Kingdom version, although that's not to say that the Siege figure is a bad release by any stretch of the imagination. Personally, I would have liked to have seen this completely scrapped here for this Kingdom Ultra Magnus, as I've always thought this particular gimmick does end up actually hindering the figure overall, much like we saw in the robot mode with the incredibly huge and clunky legs. I just wish this could have been completely scrapped here for this Kingdom version, and we could have merely just got Ultra Magnus in his robot mode and then the truck and trailer form. But nonetheless, you can see that as far as the differences are concerned, it is merely just the chest unit. Even the crutch plate does appear to be the exact same as far as the reversal for this particular White Optimus Prime configuration. The legs are the same, everything here is the same, and of course as we spin around here to the back, it is merely just the vehicle mode components which are different. So without further ado, let's move in to transformation of this into truck mode. So to begin with, you're going to want to disengage the arms. We can take this front chest unit. I would recommend pulling the crutch plate forward just to allow for some clearance. Fold the head in, snap this there into place, hinge the arms here out to the sides, rotate this around, and then you're going to want to shift this entire section here forward until it does actually click into place like so. We can take the arms, bring these sections here back, and these are going to align up appropriately with this slot. So you can see how we have a tiny tab. If I just bring this one here in for a closer look, this tab will peg into this slot here, and then of course this tiny groove will actually slide into that slot. We can then take the wrists. Personally, I would recommend leaving them like this or rotating them so that the back of the hand is facing outwards, as unfortunately these are an absolute eyesore when we do have him in vehicle mode. Compress the crutch plate. We can then take the legs here, hinge those sections up, tab these sections here into place and fold up the hill spurs, and here we have the white section of Ultra Magnus fully transformed up into his truck mode. Now I shan't go into too much detail on this just yet, as of course we do have to assemble the entire trailer. So for that, you're going to want to bring in the legs, take these sections here, hinge all of this out much like you would on the original Siege version. Repeat the same process here on the opposite side. We can then take the upper body of Ultra Magnus, extend this piece, take this red section and push this out, and you can see two tabs here and here, as well as a third tab that will actually slide into some slots. So align this up appropriately and just slide that in there, and of course come here to this side and repeat the exact same process. So just slide that in, solidifying that connection. You'll then want to take this tab, which will peg here into this slot. So snap that in there, and you can see how we once again do have another tab that will slide into this section here at the top. So just snap that into place, and of course repeat the same process. We can then turn our attention here to the interior, and this is where you're going to want to bring in the forearm gauntlets, and these will peg into place on either side. So just tab that in there. Of course, come here to this side and repeat the exact same process, snapping all of that. We can now set this section here off to the side, bring in the shoulder pauldrons, pull off the missiles, and then pull these sections down, as these will now slide into one another. And this is where you're going to want to take this, slide this assembly into that groove, much like you would on the Siege version. We can then take the trailer, and you can see how we have 2 slots here and here, as well as 2 locking mechanisms. They are going to peg into this tab, as well as into these clips. So lift this here all the way up, and of course just align this up appropriately, snap that in there, snap that side in, come here to this side and repeat the exact same process. We can then take this section, and you can see how we do have these tiny little slots here at the top. These are going to fit into these grooves, so just rest that there along the side. And there we have Kingdom Ultra Magnus fully transformed up into his truck and trailer alt mode. Now, taking a look here at Ultra Magnus in his vehicle mode, this is by far where some of my major critiques do lay with this figure, as it is just so lazy in my opinion, due to it basically having the same engineering as the Siege version, and as they have modified some of the pieces in order to better resemble an Earth mode, he is left with some really ugly and unsightly gaps. And for a leader class, I personally do not believe that you are getting nowhere near as much engineering as you would see on the likes of course, the Beast Wars Megatron or any of the other previous War for Cybertron figures. This is just so bad. You can see how they've even sculpted the Autobot insignia silhouette, but they have not applied any decals nor paint applications. I cannot excuse the ugly forearms as well as the hands that clearly stick out. And now some of you may say that that was an issue that was present on the Siege version. However, when I actually bring that figure in for a comparison, you will see that that figure did actually manage it better. As we take a look here towards the front section of the cab, in my opinion, the only real redeeming angle of this figure, it does look fantastic, and that is what just makes this figure, in my opinion, even more sore than it already is because it had so much potential. It's just they decided to go with a slightly lazy route, which has unfortunately led to a figure which honestly wouldn't have even been possible for the likes of the Power of the Primes toy line. You can see we do have some nice gunmetal here used for the grille as well as the window wipers. I do actually really love the skull work here. Of course, we now have the new Earth mode wheels, and these are present on both the cab as well as the trailer, and they look fantastic. But other than that, honestly, there really isn't much else I can say about this truck. It does roll. You can of course bring in some of the accessories such as the missile pods, and you can attach these here onto the sides, which I guess creates for a little more of a visually appealing look. But to be honest, I personally don't like it. I also don't like how this section here very loosely tabs into place. It really doesn't take much to disengage there. This here should have been extended so it actually clipped onto this piece, much like we saw on the original Siege version. And here, for a Siege version comparison, you can just see how much more bulk this particular figure had when in comparison. All of this was completely filled out. In my opinion, this looks a lot more like a solid leader class than compared here to this figure, and when actually holding both of them, the new Siege version is actually significantly heavier than compared to this particular release. Now, as we take a look here from a side perspective, the only thing I would say that the new Kingdom version does better when compared to this is we no longer have that huge gap that we got here for the Siege release, but you can see how the hands and the arms were concealed. The actual trailer itself was also bulked out a little better. You have the shoulder stacks, which actually pegged into the back of the trailer, whereas on this version, they simply just have this massive gap, and they've been extra lazy to actually leave those pegs that we saw on the Siege version here. So honestly, I personally am thoroughly let down by this figure overall, despite it being my preferred when given the option between the two, as of course in his robot mode I think he looks really awesome. It's just that, as mentioned, the engineering is very lazy, especially here for the vehicle mode. Here, for a truck and trailer size comparison, we have Kingdom Ultra Magnus compared next to the Earthrise Optimus Prime, and as far as the scaling between these two figures is concerned, I think this looks wicked. It's just unfortunate that we do have so many gaps scattered throughout this figure. I'm really hoping that a third-party company will come up with an upgrade kit that will drastically increase the overall visual appearance of this figure here in his alternate mode. But as far as a vehicle is concerned, it is certainly very substantial. And here, for one final vehicle mode size comparison, we have Kingdom Ultra Magnus compared to, once again, some of the 86 movie cast, including of course the Earthrise RC. And as far as the scale between all of these is concerned, I actually think that it works rather nicely. You can see that as far as he is compared next to some of these other deluxe figures, of course Hot Rod is officially a Voyager but is more or less in the deluxe class scale. I think he works really well with these figures. And so, some final thoughts. Overall, taking everything that I have discussed in this review into account, I have got to say that Kingdom Ultra Magnus is for sure one of the major letdowns out of the War for Cybertron trilogy so far. Many fans, myself included, were so looking forward to what this figure had in store for us, ever since listings did begin to surface that we were going to be seeing an Earth mode figure. As mentioned, when we got some of those in package shots, many of us were thrilled that we were going to be getting a more G1 accurate representation, although when the promotional images started to circulate, many of us were very let down, and I've got to say that actually having the figure in hand, it really doesn't add anything that I did not already discuss in my thoughts and analysis when I took a look at some of those official promo images. As mentioned, the robot mode, as far as the crotch plate upwards is concerned, I believe looks really well done. The new head sculpt, the new shoulder sections, of course, the new chest unit, all look very G1 accurate, and the mold itself is actually pretty decent. It's just much like the Siege version, the legs are slightly stubby, they are way too bulky, especially for a character design which, whilst had the appearance of being slightly more armoured up, they were nowhere near as big as we got here with this figure. Of course, we have the white Optimus Prime / Armorless Ultra Magnus. I personally have never really been a fan of that gimmick, and as I also mentioned in my thoughts and analysis, I would much rather had them completely scrapped that gimmick and merely just given us Ultra Magnus in his robot mode that transformed into a truck and trailer. This figure in all should have just been completely scrapped and started from scratch. He should have had completely brand new engineering which perhaps borrowed from the Masterpiece, much like we have seen from some of the other Kingdom figures. As far as the alternate mode is concerned, it is dire. It is by far one of the weakest looking alternate modes that I have seen from a modern day War for Cybertron figure, and I just cannot excuse the hollowness, the lazy, almost unfinished feeling that you get when holding this figure here in his vehicle mode, due to this section here not really having a place to lock into, the hollow spacing here on the sides, the lack of a secured connection here between the shoulder armour and these redundant clips, and I'm really hoping that this is a figure that Hasbro actually do reattempts in a couple of years' time to give us a definitive G1 Ultra Magnus. So overall, as far as a recommendation is concerned, I guess it really comes up to personal preference on whether or not you think this figure is worth double dipping for basically just a re-release of the Siege version with a few additional components. I personally, given the option between the two, would actually go with this figure, as I do prefer the look of his robot mode. But if I had the Siege version and I was not a completionist and I did not plan to review him, I probably would never add this figure here to my collection, as it is basically more of the same. I really hope that you enjoyed this review and that you did find it informative. I do apologise if I did show this figure in a slightly negative light. It's just I have to be completely upfront and 100% honest with you guys, and I would love to know down in the comment section below on whether or not you agree with my thoughts, or do you believe I am being too harsh. I thank you all for watching, and until my next review, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.